everyone, I am here with another chapter of the Hardy Boys. This will be chapter 11. Surprise Tactics. Let's get into this. "Hang on," Frank shouted, holding the throttle hard ahead. The plane banked sharply on its side as the towering black-green spruce trees loomed at them. The three passengers braced themselves for the collision. But the old craft responded instantly and slipped across the trees, riding on the left wing. The boys couldn't hear the bows scrape the underside of the plane. The floats jerked as they were caught momentarily, then released by the treetops. Frank righted the plane, pulling back hard on the stick. The craft was in the clear. Whew! He let out his breath slowly, blinking as his taut nerves relaxed. That was a tight one. He could hear sighs of relief from his companions. Joe leaned forward in his seat and gripped Frank's shoulder. "Pretty fancy flying, brother," he said, and Chet and Caribou added their praise. "It was a good workout," Frank said modestly. "Now back to the search." He circled the aircraft over the lake again, staying higher this time. Grimly, Joe pointed to the submerged logs on each side of the wrecked plane. They were roped together. "Those logs were put there deliberately," he said. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to booby-trap us." "The thieves knew we hunt for them," Caribou muttered. "We must be careful." The plane cruised over the lake and wooded area again. There was no one in sight, nor was there any trace of a plane. "Wonder where the gang found that wreck," Joe mused. "It could have been abandoned somewhere in those woods," Frank suggested. "And they dragged it out onto the lake." "That would have been a tough job," Chet remarked. "Let's get back to Fort Smith and report this to the Mounties," Frank suggested. "Maybe they know something about it." The others agreed, and they headed back to the town. As they approached the landing, Frank radioed ahead for clearance. When he sat down, he taxied straight to the RCMP jetty. They went at once to the office. Corporal Fergus was there and listened intently to their story. "Could that abandoned plane have been found in the woods, Corporal?" asked Frank. "One was wrecked up there in the bush some time ago," Fergus replied. "Whoever dragged it out of the lake must know the area well." "Why?" Chet asked. "Not many people were familiar with the location of the wreck," the corporal answered. "Would Abner Dulick be familiar with that territory, Caribou?" Frank asked suddenly. "Oi!" Caribou nodded. "That Dulick run his trap lanes through there many times." "I've been trying to figure out why Dulick trailed us from Edmonton," Frank said. "One reason could have been he's mixed up with the ruined stones theft." "Sounds possible," Joe agreed. "And he either was on his way to warn his buddies about us or wanted to stop our sleuthing cold, or both." "He is a snake. He would do it," Caribou declared angrily. Corporal Fergus said he would send several mounted police up to the area of the abandoned plane to look around. If they reported anything suspicious, he would let the Hardys know. When the brothers and their friends started back along the jetty toward their craft, Joe suddenly stopped. "There's a guy nosing around our plane." Quickly, the three boys ran down the jetty. By now, the fellow was leaning over, the upper half of his body inside the plane. Frank grasped him with an arm and pulled him up. "Biff!" he shouted in surprise. "Boy, it's good to see you. But what are you doing here?" "Looking for you," the lanky boy replied, grinning. "Your father cabled Sam telling us where to reach you. He added that Tony and Radley were in the town of Hay River. After Caribou had joined them and introductions were made, Biff explained, "We tracked the gang to Hay River, west of the mouth of the Slave River, but they're plenty shrewd at looting us. So Sam wants you all to come up and join forces with us. I came in on the early morning plane." The Hardys and Chet then brought Biff up to date on their own experiences in detective work, both on the Viking ruined stone mystery and the lodge thefts case. "I hate to give up the search for Keating and his fuel drums," Frank concluded. "After I'd like to find out if Abner Dulick is mixed up with the thieves." "Me too," Caribou put in hotly. "You boys go to Hay River. I will stay here and watch out for Dulick." "All right, Caribou," Frank agreed, smiling at the trapper. "You can have first crack at your friend Dulick." "Bonterey!" Caribou exploded. "Friend never." After the boys had attended to having the rented plane fueled and checked out, they had lunch, then bid goodbye to the French Canadian. Joe slid into the pilot's seat and with Frank, Chet, and Biff as passengers, taxied out onto the river. The takeoff was smooth and rapid was soon the plane was heading out over the dense spruce forest on the northeastern route to the town of Hay River. When they came in sight of the town, Joe landed the float plane and tied up an aircraft jetty. The four jumped out and Biff led them down the main street to a small frame hotel where Sam Radley and Tony were waiting. "Hi, swell to see you," they were greeted excitedly. Sam Radley, a man of medium height, weary build, and thinning sandy hair, pumped their hands. The groups exchanged accounts of their recent activities on the mysteries. "There's no doubt," said Sam, "that the gang we are after are some thoroughly experienced woodsmen." "We feel they're close by," added Tony, "and so do the Mounties." "The thieves' operations seem to center around lodges on the shore of Great Slave Lake," Sam continued. "So far, they've never stolen from places inland." Frank said thoughtfully, "It could be coincidence, of course, but the locale of these lodge thefts and the finding of the Viking ruined stone is the same, Great Slave Lake." Joe threw his brother a keen glance. "In other words, you think it isn't coincidence and there's a connection between the two mysteries?" "Yes," Frank replied with conviction, "for two reasons. Our radio antenna was knocked down while Dad was receiving your report on the lodge theft, Sam. Kelly could have been eavesdropping outside." And he went on, "Kelly is also a suspect in the missing ruined stone case." Joe broke in, "That means those new $100 bills stolen from Caribou and the ones used to pay for the fuel drums in Fort Smith are from the same batch of money." Frank looked excited. "If our theory's right, we are after the same bunch of thieves, not two separate gangs." "In that case," said Sam Radley, "it's a good thing we did get together on the mysteries." The six friends continued their speculations until bedtime. The next morning after breakfast, Frank and Joe decided to scout Great Slave Lake. The Great Slave Lake area around Hay River. The Hardys flew off, turning east toward the mouth of Slave River. As they flew along the southern shore, cruising at a low altitude, Joe said excitedly, "I see a group of men below. They're digging. And it obviously isn't a well from the rectangular shape of the hole," Frank commented after circling over the figures below. "My guess is they're looking for something. If it's any kind of legitimate enterprise, I imagine the Mounties at Hay River will know about it," Joe suggested. "Let's go back and check." When they returned and told their friends about the excavation, Sam Radley looked puzzled and at once called the Hay River RCMP. When he returned, he said the officers there know nothing about any digging in the vicinity. Think the fellows you saw might be the thieves? Tony asked Frank and Joe. We couldn't tell, of course, Frank replied. How about our finding out, though? I suggest we go up there tonight and investigate, Sam advised. If the men are members of the gang, we don't want to scare them off, the others concurred. And as soon as darkness had fallen that evening, the group set out. They went down the dock and climbed into the boat with an outboard that Sam had rented. They used the motor until they drew near the spot where Frank and Joe had seen the diggers, then turned it off and rowed to shore. They beached the craft and crept along the sandy bank. Suddenly, Joe whispered, "Someone has a fire burning." The group headed silently toward the glowing light. Like trained and skilled woodsmen, they approached without a sound. Ahead, 6 rough-looking, unshaven men were seated around a small dining campfire. They evidently had just finished eating supper and were leaning back relaxed. The boys and Sam could not make out the men's features in the flickering, uncertain light. Suddenly, one of the campers spoke. "How's the translation of the stone coming?" he asked. The man seated next to him shrugged and answered, "I'm making progress on the symbols, but slowly." Frank turned to Sam Radley and whispered excitedly, "Symbols! These men must be the ruined stone crooks." Radley nodded in agreement. "Okay, fellows," he murmured. "We may be able to take them off guard and capture the whole crew." In whispered argument, they decided that upon a signal from Radley, the pursuers would swoop down on their quarry. Chet nodded and rubbed his damp palms together, then set himself for the spring. But before Radley could say charge, Chet's right toe snagged on a vine, and down he went into an oomph that resounded through the stillness of the dark forest. "Oh, for Pete's sake," Joe moaned. "Get him!" Radley shouted. The 6 strangers, however, had been amply warned and were on their way before the boys could move in. Snatching up their gear, they ran off into the darkness with muttered curses. Only one man straggled, and Joe pounced on him. The rest clustered around Joe as he pulled the lone captive to his feet. The Hardys gasped and explained in surprise, "Kelly!" The thin, pale captive, not wearing a head bandage, showed no change of expression. He stared at the brothers with cold, blank eyes. "What are you doing here?" Joe snapped. "Where's the Viking ruined stone?" Kelly remained suddenly silent. "I guess he's not talking, boys," said Radley. "Let's search his duffel." Joe picked up the canvas bag and pulled out the contents. Among the camping equipment, he found an odd-shaped package wrapped in brown paper. "Look," he cried, untying it and holding up a slab of stone about 18 inches long and 6 inches wide. It was covered with angular, slanting lines. "The ruined stone!" Joe cried. "We found it!" Sam Radley and Tony, meanwhile, had securely bound the prisoner. They joined the others in scrutinizing the heavy stone and its strange markings. "I guess one mystery is almost solved," Chet said, beaming. "We'd better not count on that until we get Kelly back to Hay River and the stone's authenticity is verified," Sam Radley said. The Hardys agreed. "Also," Frank said, "we have to track down the rest of the gang and find out whether or not they are the lodge thieves." The captors took Kelly back to the boat with them, then motored swiftly to Hay River and went directly to the Mountie station with the fugitive from Bayport. "Fine work, boys," the inspector on duty said after hearing their story. "I'll hold this man and contact the police chief colleague for verification." The police took the still silent prisoner into custody, and still that they would let the Hardys and Radley know if he revealed anything under questioning. When Frank and Joe showed them the stone, the Mounties were amazed and impressed by the find. "This looks like the real thing," the officer said, examining the carved tablet. "I told you," Chet exulted to his companions. Sam Radley shook his head doubtfully. "I'm not convinced," he said. "Me either," Frank declared. Getting the stone back seemed too easy. "Well," Joe put it, "I'm not such a pessimist. I'm going to call Dad and tell him our news." "Help yourself," the officer gestured to his telephone. Joe placed the call to his father in Edmonton. "Good work," said Mr. Hardy after hearing the full story. "Don't jump to conclusions." "All right, Dad," said Joe. "What's our next move?" "You and Frank bring the stone to Edmonton," the detective replied. "Tell the others to stay in Hay River and keep out of sight. Ask Sam to contact me every day." "Will do, Dad," Joe said. "See you soon. So long." The Mountie agreed to let the boys take the stone along and had them sign a receipt for it. Yeah, he signed a receipt for it. After Joe had relayed his father's instructions to his companions, the whole group went to bed, tired from the excitement of the evening. The next day, the Hardys made the flight to Edmonton, arriving in the late afternoon. It was a smooth trip, and when they landed at the bustling airport, the boys hurried to the terminal. Frank carried the stone carefully wrapped and tied. As they rushed outside to a taxi, Frank stopped suddenly and pointed to a stack of newspapers on a stand close by. The Hardys stared in astonishment at the headline on the first page: "Ruined Stone Found. Hardys and Sons Return to States." Now, who knew that? And how did it get printed that soon? I think it's a fake stone. What do you guys think? That is the end of chapter 10. Hope you guys enjoyed it.